If the Iranians did try to control the straits and stop oil shipments from all the Gulf states, America might feel sufficiently nervous to send in her Indian Ocean task force to open the waterway again.
Lloyds have declared the Gulf a war zone and tripled the insurance rates.
Do you think there's any conceivable way in which a British naval presence might reappear here?
Well, I think we've got to get our priorities right.
There are misconceptions about the strait. It may be narrow, but not so narrow you can block it. You'd need to pile tankers 3 high and 12 miles across to do that. But the strait could be mined.
They don't want the superpowers to get drawn in and possibly reduce their region to chaos. It's a war that nobody wants.
Lord Carrington was lent one of the royal helicopters of the Sultan's flight so that he could go and get a military eye view of the straits, as befits a former Guards officer and former Minister of Defence. And this is what he saw: a passage 24 miles wide, through which one oil tanker passes every 19 minutes. Most of it's divided up between Omani and Iranian territorial waters, but there's a little pocket 4 miles wide of international waters, where the Russians have sometimes taken, though not today, to anchoring the odd frigate, minesweeper, or even destroyer. That's one reason why the Omanis are building a small naval base on the farthest island out in the Straits, and Lord Carrington came to look at the building work and the passing tankers, remarking that the Straits are a vital shipping lane. We must see to it, he said, that they remain free. Naval experts say that the Straits could be mined, and while the Omanis have 2 missile and 4 gunboats on patrol, they don't have minesweepers. Even the comfortably off Omanis blanch a bit with a price tag of £20 million each for a modern minesweeper. And running through Lord Carrington's mind was the fact that Britain used to have minesweepers here, and bigger warships too, until we pulled out of Bahrain in 1971. Do you think there's any conceivable way in which a British naval presence might reappear here?
Well, I think we've got to get our priorities right. I mean, what we've got to look at is the state the services are in at the moment, in the sense of how far they've been run down, what we need to do to build them up again, and then decide on what the priorities are.
In fact, Lord Carrington has also said that if Oman asked for some sort of British military help, then Britain might consider it, and that if we did consider it, it would most likely be some form of naval assistance. Michael Brunson, ITN, at the Straits of Hormuz.
If the attack on the refinery at Abadan has been limited to the destruction of storage tanks, it will be a short-term blow for Iran. If Iraq has destroyed the refinery itself, it could almost cripple the country, because most of Iran's own fuel is produced there. But so far it has seemed to be a limited war, with no desire by either side to destroy the enemy. It was in the early hours of this morning that Iraqi tanks ground across the border into Iran. The Iraqis' declared aim is to control the Shatt al-Arab waterway, up which ships sail to the Iraqi port of Basra. And this evening they claim to have surrounded the refinery town of Abadan and its port of Khorramshahr. That was the prime objective of the Iraqis today, but their planes bombed several other military targets in Iran, and the Iranians retaliated with air attacks on Baghdad, apparently causing widespread damage and casualties. Iraqi TV today showed pictures of what purported to be missile attacks on Iran. The weapon was a Soviet-made battlefield rocket known to NATO as Scud. It's thought to have an inertial guidance system with radio command for the early stages of flight. It's 35 feet long, the height of a house, and delivers a high-explosive warhead over a distance of 150 miles. The Russians have some with nuclear warheads, but wouldn't give them to the Iraqis, who are still years away from developing their own atomic bomb. With Iran's forces run down under the Ayatollah, Iraq has double the number of soldiers and probably double the number of usable tanks, with many more warplanes too. But what are Iraq's ultimate objectives, and what might they do next? We asked a defence analyst to speculate.
Their immediate objectives is to capture the whole of the area around the Shatt al-Arab waterways. Having abrogated the 1975 treaty, obviously they want now to have control of the whole of the waters there, and they've taken them. I think they will consolidate that. But it's interesting that they have now apparently surrounded Abadan, which is that big refinery very close there. Kuwait, I would suggest, must be getting very concerned about what is happening, because Iraq has often tried to take Kuwait, and the last time was in 1961, when it was the British Army, Navy and Air Force in that area that stopped them. Whether they have ambitions to move inland, I think, is debatable. I would have thought that this is going to be kept limited, but of course they'll continue air raids on each other's territories, perhaps for days yet. The suggestion that the Iraqis would be tempted to move down the Gulf, perhaps to the Straits of Hormuz, I think is a scenario that really isn't on. They have neither the capability to do it, and even if they got there, the Iranians, I believe, despite the disarray of their armed forces, would take care of them. So I don't believe that that is a possibility. It's going to be limited, it's going to be kept limited. Having achieved that, I think they'll consolidate and stay there.
The Iranian Navy today told shipping to keep out of its waters, but has made no apparent attempt to block the Straits of Hormuz. The Iranian Navy is the one arm of their services that the Iraqis can do little to touch. So if the Iranians did try to control the straits and stop oil shipments from all the Gulf states, America might feel sufficiently nervous to send in her Indian Ocean task force to open the waterway again. And if the Americans became involved, the Iranians could well turn to the Russians for help, and the conflict could escalate dramatically. But neither superpower wants that. The Soviet Union wants good relations with Iran as a future oil and gas supplier, but also has a friendship treaty with Iraq, which includes the supply of modern weapons like the MiG-23 fighter bombers, which Iraq is currently using to attack Iran. It's possible that in an attempt to bring the conflict to a halt, Russia could stop deliveries of weapons. And the Americans, still preoccupied with the hostages held in Iran, are desperately anxious not to become involved. If the Iranians were to release the American prisoners and demand supplies of spares for their disabled American weapons, the United States could hardly oblige without it being seen as a provocation by Iraq and Russia. The West is relatively well off for oil reserves at the moment, with an average 100 days supply. So no oil shortages are predicted in the near future, and the next few days will doubtless see a rapid growth of diplomatic pressure to stop the fighting. The Arab states, who in principle support Iraq in their punishment of the Iranians, would not want it to go too far. They don't want the superpowers to get drawn in and possibly reduce their region to chaos. It's a war that nobody wants.
Stuart Manall, if it's true, why should the Iraqis have broken the news?
Well, this is really puzzling in many ways. If it isn't true, for example, what possible use would it have been to the Iraqis to have made this statement? On the other hand, if one looks more positively at it, it could well be that if the Iraqis know that this is true, they could be releasing it to the world before anybody else has. They would then expect or suggest that because the hostages had been released, the United States will now help the Iranians to operate their armed forces, which are in total disarray without American help and without American backing. If that were the case, the Iraqis might then decide that now was the time to ask the Soviet Union to fulfill its commitments under the 1972 Mutual Assistance Treaty, in which case the Iraqis would ask the Russians to help them in their fight against Iran, Iran now being helped by the United States. And I find this a very difficult proposition.
Are you saying that the release of the American hostages at this time would therefore lead, or could lead, to it becoming an international dispute, a big power confrontation?
Oh, I think this is highly likely. If, in fact, the Iraqis do ask the Russians to make good their commitments under the 72 treaty, then, of course, the Americans are going to be in a very difficult situation. Are they going to help the Iranians? I find it difficult to believe that President Carter, in view of what's happened to the hostages, would now be prepared to go in and help the Iranians fight a war against the Iraqis. But on the other hand, Iran may then decide that they will do something to stop international traffic through the Gulf of Hormuz. If they did that, and the Americans had already refused to help the Iranians, the Americans would have little choice but to open that seaway again, and they would do it with the carrier task force that's now in the Indian Ocean.
Tell us briefly what sort of shape the two countries' armed forces are in as they go to war.
I think there's no doubt that on balance Iraq is in a much better shape than Iran. They have got extremely good equipment, and they've got a wide range of equipment in their army, their navy and their air force. Modern Soviet tanks, modern Soviet armored personnel carriers, modern Soviet aircraft, including the MiG-23s and the Tu-22. Very small navy, mostly patrol boats, but they do have some with the Russian Styx missiles on them, which can be very effective. Iran, on the other hand, although it's got on paper some of the finest weapon systems in the world, including British Chieftain tanks, for example, and the American F-14 aircraft armed with the Phoenix missile, probably the most effective in the world, they simply can't operate them. They're short of spares. Half their armed forces personnel have deserted since the Ayatollah took over. I think they're in total disarray. And if the Iraqis really want to move into Iran, not completely invade Iran, but if they want to move in and take over 10, 20, 40 miles of territory to make sure that the whole of the Shat al-Arab belongs to them, they're in a very strong position to do so.
So it may have suddenly dawned on the Iranians that they really do need the Americans after all.
The Iranians were never in greater need of friends, and they shouldn't have treated their real friends so abominably when the Ayatollah took over.
Vice Marshal, thank you very much.
12 miles off the coast of Oman, the great supertankers of the world lie high in the water, at anchor, idle and empty. It's not just the safety of the vessels and their crews which worries the tanker owners, it's the cost too. Lloyd's have declared the Gulf a war zone and tripled the insurance rates. The dividing line is at 24 degrees north, just 20 miles north of here, and this is as near as the tanker captains can get and still find the water shallow enough to anchor. In the last week, the number of tankers which have dropped anchor off Oman has tripled to 30, and it's presenting something of a problem to the Omanis. Regularly, the harbour master from the capital, Muscat, or the police, takes out a patrol boat to identify new arrivals and to make sure the tankers aren't unloading ballast and thus polluting the Omani waters. Among the 30 tankers, we came across this one, the Minab, from the Iranian oil port of Haram Shah. The Minab is captained by an Englishman and crewed almost exclusively by British seamen. From the harbour master's vessel, I spoke to the captain of the Minab. Could you tell me which company owns your vessel? Over.
It's owned by the government of Iran, over.
And you're expecting orders from your owners in London, is that correct?
Now they come through London because Iran cannot send communications to the ship, over.
And a second Iranian ship, also owned by the Iranian government, which has just arrived from Egypt and is also awaiting instructions from the Iranian government via London as to whether or not to go up into the Gulf. There's a neat irony in the effect on Oman of the battle going on at the top of the Gulf, and that is Oman is the only Gulf country not dependent on the Gulf for her oil exports. And so if the Strait of Hormuz were to be closed, although it would be a military headache for Oman, it would be a bonanza for her oil. John Suchet, News at 10, in Omani territorial waters.
All the returning Britons were involved in building Basra's new prestige petrochemical plant. By year's end, it should have been turning oil into plastic pellets. Construction took 3 years, and completion of one section was formally signed the night before the bombing. Now it is demolished. Despite a massive Iraqi military build-up in Basra, there was no warning that Iran would strike.
2 Iranian Phantoms came in early in the morning, 6:15, and hit the accommodation plant and the petrochemical plant with rockets.
What were you doing at the time?
Sleeping.
We got flung out of bed. We run to the motel, which had been bombed or hit by rockets, and then we tried to do what we could, and then we got out the camp.
Just
that morning, we all expected to be given information as to how to get out and when, because the night before there was heavy bombing all around the refinery. Basra airport was being bombed, and you could see the action above the Shat al-Arab river.
Was there any air raid warning?
No. It was all over in like 10 seconds.
Had you been warned what precautions to take if you were attacked?
No.
Then, after the first attack, came the dash to the Kuwait border, 30 miles away.
A convoy towards Kuwait. That was all. A convoy of trucks, anything that had wheels towards the border, that was all.
We use our trucks, which weren't supposed to go on the road, with away.
Were you able to get any belongings with you to bring home?
A few.
And how much have you left out?
People just stole vehicles to get away, private vehicles.
Did the Iraqis let you through the border with no trouble?
No, they let me through because I had valid visas, passport and air tickets because I was due home on Friday anyway.
What about those who couldn't pick them up?
They just had to wait, and when we got through to Kuwait...
Now they estimate the devastated plant will take at least another 3 years to rebuild. Nick Gowing, News at 10, Heathrow Airport.
An accident of history gave this desolate place to the Omanis, but it's pure modern economics which gives them control over the shipping lanes. Quite simply, the fastest route through the strait lies in Omani territorial waters. Normally, one Omani gunboat patrols the strait for 12 hours a day, but now there are 3. Between them, they patrol 24 hours a day. We joined one such gunboat. There are misconceptions about the strait. It may be narrow, but not so narrow you can block it. You'd need to pile tankers 3 high and 12 miles across to do that. Nor is it difficult to navigate. There are plenty of lighthouses. The stark land stands out well on radar. There are no shifting sands, no cross-shipping, and the water's deep. But the strait could be mined, and the Omani Navy has no minesweepers. A minesweeper, on which everything has to be anti-magnetic, even the teaspoons, would cost £25 million, and not even an oil-rich sultan can afford a fleet of those. So these patrol boats are on the lookout for mines, but there's more to their task than that.
The job of these Omani gunboats is not just to make sure that other countries and their armed forces don't abuse the Strait of Hormuz, but also to make sure that captains of merchant shipping obey the rules. And that job alone is keeping these gunboats pretty busy at the moment.
Within an hour of setting out, we spotted this container ship, the Arabian Endeavour, registered in Hamburg and bound for Dubai. Oman guards fiercely her inshore waters for coastal traffic only and keeps them pollution-free for fishing. This ship is inside them, and the gunboat commander, on secondment from the Royal Navy, takes him to task.
I must inform you that you are at present violating the inshore traffic zone.
The container ship's captain replies that he doesn't want to go any further out because it would bring him nearer to Iran. He doesn't say, though, that by coming so close to Oman, he will knock 60 miles off his trip, thus saving his owner time and money. Last month, nearly 250 vessels similarly violated Omani waters. John Souchet, News at 10, with the Omani Navy in the Strait of Hormuz.